This is our Center for the Blue Economy speaker series and also the Environmental Justice and Sustainability speaker series. Welcome everyone, welcome all the students. This is part of a class for our International Environmental Policy students at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And we open this course and the lecture series up to the public as well. So welcome to everyone from the public, welcome to the students, and welcome to our speaker, Meaghan Brosnan, which I'm so happy you're here from WildAid. Our director, Dr. Jason Skorst, will formally introduce you, but as has become our tradition, we start with a land acknowledgement. And today we'd like to acknowledge that we are physically meeting in the indigenous tribal area of the Achasta. This is the city of Monterey and the whole Monterey Bay. It was known as the Achasta, and it is the indigenous home to the tribal nation of the Esselen, also known as the Carmelino, the Monterey Band, the Rumsen, the Chalon, Ohlone, those technically in the San Francisco Bay, and the Costanoan. Those are the indigenous people of the Monterey Bay area. They are enrolled tribal members are identified in our local missions. And we respect the role of the indigenous today, especially in serving and helping to go back to old ways, to look at ways to live in harmony with nature. And I'm so glad that the Middlebury Institute also puts its money where our mouth is with a scholarship for indigenous people here in Monterey Bay. So with that, and with that inclusive spirit that the students have brought to the speaker series, I'll turn it over to Jason to introduce our speaker tonight.
Okay, thanks so much, Rachel, and good to see everybody. Very happy to introduce Meaghan Brosnan, who's a Marine Program Director at WildAid. We have worked with Meaghan, in various capacities over the years, and she is the supervisor for a couple of our alumni who are very happy at WildAid. We love WildAid, great organization. And this topic is really, I think, may actually close the door here, sorry. That's the thing about having a little kid. Sometimes they can be loud. We have, marine protected areas is a topic of a lot of interest in both, our circles as students and faculty and alumni, but also just the wider community. Many of you have heard about this new 30 by 30 pledge, which is to protect 30% of all kind of natural resources, both terrestrial and ocean by 2030. And so marine protected areas are going to be a bigger deal than ever in this decade. But as we all know, what's on paper is not necessarily what's protected in practice. And so this topic here, Meaghan brings just, decades of experience working on the actual nuts and bolts of the enforcement of making sure that what's promised in these protected areas is actually delivered. And WildAid has a very kind of unique template and kind of approach to doing this and scaling it in systems around the world. So really excited to hear all about this. And so thanks so much, Meaghan, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen in just a second here. While I'm faffing about with that, I tend to communicate with really awkward, like there's dad jokes. Yeah, there's also mom jokes. So if those of you who are not in places where you absolutely cannot turn on your video can turn on your video. I'm not even wearing any makeup, people. Like, come on, like, please come in and let me see your faces so I at least know if like you're finding me funny or totally awkward. I would appreciate it. Also, I have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old that's about to come home. So yes, there will be stampedes coming through the house. So yeah, let me share here. I don't need to worry about that. Okay. Do you have my my slides here? Yes. Okay. Sorry, for some reason all of my screens go to one screen at a time when I do this. Okay, excellent. So yeah, Awesome to be back here as always. You guys are always great. Mary, great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you guys enjoyed reading her blog post as a part of your pre-reading. What I'm going to be talking I think actually what I'm going to be talking about today is really one very specific component, right, of marine protected areas, ocean conservation, and coastal fisheries enforcement, right? Gotta have compliance, gotta have enforcement in order to actually see the impact. I tend to nerd out. Feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions, and pause me if I am into my notes and not hearing you. Please just like unmute and interrupt me, really, and we can keep on rolling with this. So. Come on, baby. There we go. Okay. So I'm sharing these pictures with you, first off, to prove that, yes, I did not have gray hair at one point in my life, but also to give you a visual of, like, in the American context, what are we helping developing countries to build? It is their version of a compliance and enforcement system that you see, such as what you see here. Okay. So if you look at that fisherman on the boat, wasn't exactly excited to see us, but this was a third generation fisherman, right? And he understood legit that we had to do our jobs in order to make sure that his grandchildren would have a chance to fish in the future, right? So the other component of that is just remembering that I'm sorry, guys, I'm seeing you, but I'm not seeing you. That's why I got distracted there. Okay, here we go. And that's really what enforcement is, right? Compliance. It's not actually about catching people breaking the law. It's about maximizing the number of people who are following the law, which he was, by the way. He was one of those beautiful fishermen who invited you into his cabin and had all of his permits laid out in a binder. It was a nice, easy boarding. So that's what we're helping ocean leaders to develop, is that kind of a collaborative system with communities, with the regulated communities, they've got the right safety equipment, they got the forms, they got the case package processes. That's what we're doing in the middle there. And they're going to be building it from there. I'm going to go into a lot more detail later, but just wanted to start it off with that. So I already told you this. With our work focusing on doing the enforcement is done broadly in two types of areas. The first is marine protected areas. Don't get me started into the heavy detail of what a marine protected area is, because it's up for debate. What I like to say is, think of the national parks of the oceans, right? In the best case scenario, it's a large area, mostly of no take, where the ocean is given a chance to recover and breathe, right? Thing you guys need to know, bottom line, when they're well done, they work. You'll see a quadrupling of the amount of wildlife within their boundaries in a number of years, okay? Second type of area we work is really just coastal fisheries, right? Think about places where coastal communities have been utilizing the resources of the oceans for generations. Similarly to marine protected areas, when they're well managed, coastal fisheries can just flourish. Now, one other item I would want to topic is that's really pertinent right now is also climate change, right? You can't really think of any environmental topic without having to also think about how climate change is going to be impacting them. Well, protecting and preserving our coastal areas also has a very important role to play with that, okay? Seagrass beds, mangroves, per acre can sequester 10 to 15 times more carbon than the Amazon rainforest. It is a huge carbon sink. Not to mention it's important nursery grounds for lots of all of the babies that we want to have coming out of the ocean. So when you're thinking about it, don't just think about pretty corals, think about all that blue carbon that we're protecting in that work. And in that context, as Professor Scorse just mentioned there is a lot of organizations working to expand how much of the ocean is protected as a highly protected marine protected area. Think basically almost no fishing, no extractive issues in that area. In the 30 by 30, they want 30% of the oceans protected by 2030. It's really hard to wrap your head around how much area that is. So to reach that goal, the world has to protect an area of the ocean equivalent to 10 times the land area of the US to get to 30% by 2030. Okay, so there is a lot of ocean that countries are working to better protect. And the good news is there's a lot of governments, there's a lot of well-financed non-NGOs that are working on the policy implementation, the legal component of that, the science and the social science and community engagement to make sure that these are placed in the right areas. So we're moving. Work with me here. But this is why we come in, okay? 60% of the world's marine protected areas, they're not well enforced. If they're not well enforced, if people aren't following those laws, what's the point, right? We need marine protected area quality as well as quantity. Similarly, from the fisheries perspective, illegal fishing is the third most lucrative illegal industry globally. It's a 23 billion annual black market. So bottom line, despite their promise, both marine protected areas and illegal fishing share that one common problem that could prevent them from actually achieving that awesome potential, right? The lack of effective enforcement. So that should hopefully give you the context of why we do what we do and also how we fit into that ocean conservation ecosystem. Conservation is a team sport. There's no way around it. We're not the only ones that are needed to save it, but we feel that an important niche. So that's the big picture. Any questions before I move on from there?
I've had everybody, I said, just everybody wait to the end. Just wait.
Okay. Okay, sounds good.
Then we'll open it up.
Okay, write them down. Okay. This is where I get really nerdy, so bear with me. We just how do we do our work? I'm going to get it really high level, then I'm going to bring it down into a few examples. Please, again, ask me questions. So we have a team that has over 120 years now of collective enforcement experience. We're like you saw in that first picture, we're the folks who have worn the uniforms and done the work. And based off of that experience and based off of decades of work as a program in the developing world, we've developed this framework. In every coastal fishery, in every marine protected area, you need these 5 components to have a complete marine protection system, to have an enforcement system that's actually going to work and be maintained in the long run. When we work in a new location, we work with ocean leaders to first do a comprehensive assessment of their strengths and weaknesses and gaps in each of these components. And then once we know the gaps, we also work with them to create that vision of what they want to build to. and then we help to implement it. Easy, right? No problem. Usually it takes a matter of years to achieve that vision, depending on how complicated it is. So what do these look like? Surveillance and enforcement. That is basically being able to find and intercept or capture an illegal fish or approacher. Now that's going to look differently in a different location. In a really huge ocean area, that's going to need to be a larger vessel that's pretty, ocean capable, maybe a fancy satellite system, right, to be able to identify the illegal activity. In a smaller coastal community, that it can be a really robust, informant and tip line network, and beach patrols, and people who have a handheld radio and a pair of binoculars. What matters is that you have a way to find the illegal activity, find the folks who are doing it, and catch them. Next component is policies and consequences, right? Bottom line is there has to be laws and policies in place that make illegal fishing illegal. Seems common sense, but we've found gaps, places where they actually miss that step. And there have to be consequences for their actions. Now, these consequences do not need to be a highly complicated legal and court system that require lawyers and judges. And in fact, in general, we advise wherever possible to avoid that at all costs. In many locations, there are traditional systems that have been in place for centuries that work to leverage consequences that should be used and empowered to have those initial consequences. Consistent funding, pretty common sense. Rangers need to be paid. Gas needs to go into boats. The key item that I want to make a point here is that we're not economists, unlike other people on this call, but we are really obsessive with pragmatism. So our component in that is to make sure that any system that is designed with our partners' visions is designed in a way that it's likely to actually be able to be afforded in the long run, right? If you design a multi-million-dollar system for a park that's unlikely to ever get more than $100,000 a year in income, you failed. And I also, and a big component of that is you don't have to have perfect compliance in order to have conservation outcomes and impacts, okay? You just need to have good enough compliance. And I really passionately and strongly argue that actually needs to be the goal. You need to get the compliance up to the level where you're seeing more fish, you're seeing more sharks, you're seeing the community's values being achieved, and then stop over designing it from there. Please stop on that one. Training and mentorship, pretty common sense, right? That Ensign and JG Mercer that you saw in the photo had no freaking clue what she was doing. That was one of my first boardings when I was a lead boarding officer. Okay, guys, I was scared out of my mind. I had folks who were next to me, who had been doing this for decades, stepping me through the process, reminding me when I skipped a step, right? We need mentorship. No one should be expected to be up and running within a matter of weeks. So we always provide mentorship to the folks. That's a big part of our role with our partners, is just to be that resource. We also work really hard to connect them with peer mentors, folks who maybe are, from the region and might have more shared experiences with them, because that's, again, really important. And then on the training focus, people have to be taught how to do the job and do it well. But again, when you're thinking about long-term sustainability, it shouldn't be one-off trainings. A series of one-off trainings do not create long-term efficiency. And this is a message for all you guys too. I'm sure you all already recognize that learning is not something that you finish after you get your master's or your PhD, right? It's something that you have to do for life. Well, being a boarding officer, being a ranger, Like, it's no different. Skills are perishable, laws change, best practices change. You have to have a system in place where these guys are getting taught and trained annually at least to make sure that it's working. We're doing that in Palau right now, which is, it's pretty awesome. They're working with their Fish and Wildlife organization. They're holding it at the police academy. You know, again, no need to replicate capability that are already there. Saves money, makes their life easier. Go for it. Last item, community engagement. Guys, the community, you know, there's all sorts of moral reasons that, yeah, like the coastal communities need to be actively engaged and included in the management process. But like, even beyond it, if you're thinking about it from a cat and mouse perspective, you know, there's more of them. They have lived their generations. Like, you are going to lose if you make it a you versus them. Bottom line, like, you are not going to maximize compliance. So a lot, and it's interesting the number of locations where we work where rangers don't quite recognize their role in that. And it's not just education. It's also just really respectful engagement with the regulated community and how to do that. They need to be your partners, bottom line. You know, when one of the parks I just visited from Ecuador, they bought a few handheld radios for the local octopus fishers. And they call them regularly when they see, you know, Peruvian or commercial vessels coming in where they shouldn't be fishing. Like, that's gold. We used to have to try to maintain a video camera on a remote island to try and get that kind of information, which like a couple $100 of radios, you know, gave them. It's powerful. Okay, not supposed to ask for questions. Next point. I've mentioned that it has to be complete. Can I just reiterate, it's got to be complete. If you ignore one of these components, you're just setting up the system to fail and fall apart. Okay. And the last comment I'm going to have is you got to be able to measure, right? You need to be able to figure out if you're making progress. You need to be able to measure it. I'm happy to share it with you guys if you want to. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, but we do have an approach that we work with our partners. We're not giving them a grade, right? It's a tool to help to identify where the biggest gaps are. So for surveillance and enforcement, let's say they are a marine protected area where boats are definitely needed. Okay, are those boats, do they have enough boats? Do they have the right capacity? Can they operate safely where they need to? Do they have the equipment they need? Are they being well maintained? Right? Those are the criteria. It's pretty basic. And we rank them from a 1 to a 5 based off of how well they meet those different criteria. You can do that same thing in each of these components. I'll move on from there. Okay, so just want to like underscore the point that while how that marine protection system is created is going to be unique in each location, it has worked and proven applicable in worldwide. Okay. So I'm going to bring you to the Galapagos because everybody wants to go to the Galapagos. That's where we were born as a program 20 years ago. And when we started there, they had a broken patrol boat and major shark finning problem. They were finding up to 10,000 shark fins in single seizures. Now it's one of the best protected marine reserves in the developing world, and they have one of the densest shark populations in the world. Okay, it's possible. Yeah. So here's one example think of that, envision that marine protection system of how they did that. So when the rangers, the Galapagos National Park Rangers, when we started working there, had a mandate to enforce the laws, had a very small fleet of coastal patrol boats, so vessels that really couldn't go very far offshore. And they weren't empowered to carry out arrests. They're still not. On the flip side, the Ecuadorian Coast Guard had the power of arrest, extensive self-defense training, vessels that were very well suited for getting out into the ocean. But the Navy didn't understand the laws that that were governing the reserve, and they weren't empowered to enforce them. And I mean, park headquarters and Navy base were only like a mile away from each other on Santa Cruz Island. They'd never worked together. And the park was struggling. They couldn't get to where they needed to. And once they got there, they couldn't conduct the arrests. So it's clear to us that like a partnership between the two was the perfect way to fill that gap. And after several years and lots of dinners and beers and, et cetera, we got to the point where there was an MOU, and that MOU has been standing now for over 15 years, updated multiple times. But let me give you like one case example that kind of brings home how that works. Okay, so this is the Galapagos Control Center. The Park Service is currently uses vessel monitoring system data that is actually owned by the Ecuadorian Coast Guard. Okay, data sharing between agencies, not simple process. Now, for this particular case, the Parks Control Center identified a vessel that had entered park illegally. So on a Navy vessel, the park and the Navy officers moved to intercept it while calling this guy, Jean Ronquillo, in the control center to make sure they were vectoring in the right location. They intercepted it, seized the vessel, and arrested the crew, gathered the evidence they needed to. They found 300 tons of frozen sharks and fish, including juvenile hammerheads and silky sharks. They actually hadn't been caught in the Galapagos. They've been caught in the Western and Central Pacific. But still an important case. And so what do we have so far? We've got surveillance and enforcement complete, right? Now let's talk about the policies and consequences. Well, the crew ultimately served 4 years in prison, depending on how responsible they were. They collectively were fined nearly $6 million. That vessel is now actually a cargo vessel that was very badly needed to get cargo safely to and from the Galapagos without while minimizing the risk of invasive species introductions into the Galapagos. So you got policies and consequences as well now, all right?
Question in the chat from Mary. Is that a whale shark that we're looking
Yeah, it's a whale shark.
Bummer.
Yeah, and that's not an adult either. That's, like a teenager. So obviously that case would have had a very different result if you didn't have that partnership, if you didn't have that policies and consequences in place, right? Okay, bringing it across the ocean to coastal Ecuador, which is also a very stunning ocean place, even though it gets overshadowed by the Galapagos, poor guys. It's home to the largest remaining oceanic manta population in the world. And it also is actually one of the best scuba dives I ever had. I had oceanic mantas, more green sea turtles than I can count, a school of eagle rays past me, and then just to top it off during my surface during the decompression interval, a juvenile humpback decided to start breaching, like 100 yards away from us. So pretty special place. They're also really important for sea turtle nesting. Not sure how many of you guys know anything about leatherbacks. They're the largest sea turtle in the world. Adults can get up to the size of a Volkswagen Beetle car. And their population is rapidly declining in parts of the world. And part of the challenges with it is nesting. These huge, these huge animals pull themselves up onto shore and dig nests. And those every single one of those babies possible needs to hatch. But you've got my heathens are home. I apologize if you hear any screaming in the background. Right? The nesting, like, there are also, for hundreds of years, turtle eggs have been used as a part of cultural rituals, absolutely appropriately, when they weren't endangered. So the key to this enforcement challenge was really that community engagement component, right? So when I've last visited one of these beaches, I saw this grandma chasing off a feral dog, trying to dig into a nest with a stick. 5 years ago, the communities had no real concept of the importance or the danger that these sea turtles were under. Just needed some basic collaborative discussions with the community leaders, some basic education to come up with a solution for this. So even in the middle of COVID, these coastal communities with the park rangers, marked, protected with nets and cages and many different things, the nests, night patrols, which are pretty brutal, conducted more than 2,500 beach patrols last year alone, okay? And more than 20,000 sea turtle hatchlings were born. But even the biggest one was they had the first leatherback sea turtle successful hatching event in 40 years, thanks to those protections. So that looks very different than the first one I showed you, right? And the rangers could have tried to approach the protection of the nests in a very top-down, authoritative way, but that wasn't what was going to work, right? Getting 2,000 beach patrols in the middle of cold. It gets cold at night in Ecuador in November, especially. That's what was going to have the compliance, and that was what was going to have the successes in the long term. Just want to give you one. Ecuador actually has plenty of blue carbon in itself, but just wanted to give you one more example, just from the blue carbon perspective. So first off, yes, Bahamas has a huge amount of blue carbon. Bahamas is not Nassau, okay, people? Like the west side of the Galapagos of the Bahamas is a huge mangrove area. They have large banks of seagrass meadows. And they have a really big poaching problem, both from the southeast with Dominican poachers, and from the north from US fishermen. So last point I want to make, I was talking to you about the need for that mentorship and that international peer mentorship and collaboration. Well, we helped to broker a collaboration between Florida's Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, that's their fish and game organization, and the Bahamas. And through a series of peer exchanges and meetings, a operation was launched out of Florida called Operation Bahamarama, because the US government and Coast Guard loves their dorky operation names. And during this operation, the Bahamas and the Florida FWCC were in close communication, talking about doing patrols, looking for high likelihood areas. Long story short, they caught one fisherman who had been fishing for, on many reports regularly in the Bahamas waters for years, never with a permit. And every single time he came back, he would have hundreds of pounds. In this case, he had 300 pounds of reef fish, a large portion of which he was selling at his restaurant in the Florida Keys. And thanks to a lot of collaboration with sharing of evidence, making sure everyone was clear on what laws were broken, etc. This guy ended up having to donate his brand new $300,000 vessel to the Royal Bahamian Defense Force as compensation. You got to believe that caught a lot of Florida fishermen's attention and got a lot of press coverage, right? So again, it's not just interagency, it's not just within a country. You gotta work globally. Oh, and that's just showing you, we're working throughout the Caribbean now. Not throughout the whole Caribbean, I don't want to overstate, but we're also working in Cuba and the Dominican Republic for that same reason, right? They have shared borders, they have shared populations of fish, and shared needs for collaboration. So being able to get them working together is awesome and is what's going to make the change. I kind of would like to just be able to retire and become a sea kayak instructor again. So that's the long-term goal. Sorry guys, should have hid those slides. We're trying to do this in lots of places, just so you guys know. We're 43 areas into the 250 goal by 2025, on track. I think we'll see how COVID world impacts it, but I think we're on track to reach that goal by 2025. The point is the number. The point is we've got the 30 by 30 initiative. We've got how many of thousands of coastal fisheries that need the real complete marine protection system, need a good enforcement system. My goal is that by working in those 250 areas, we're creating 250 regional leaders that are then reaching out and working with their neighbors to help build them up. Because that's the only way we're gonna reach it in the end, and that's the only way it's gonna work. Like I said, team sport, sea kayak instructor, that's the goal. And we'll go from there. How'd I do on time? Oh yeah, you guys got plenty of time for questions. Okay, that is it. So give them to me.
Fantastic. Yay. Whoop, whoop. Oh my gosh. You just always amaze me. You always amaze me.
You're too kind.
Yeah. So students, you are able to unmute yourself, pop in there, use the raise hand function, whatever you'd like to do, or indicate that you have a question in the chat. Pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mary.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys are shocked that I'm the first to ask the question.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious if, I know COVID it's hard to know during COVID, but are you still involved with patrols? Do you still do like on the ground in the field work?
Yes, so I actually just came back from Ecuador, and our team in Ecuador has been doing it all along. So in general, our goal, as you know, is really to build up the folks that are doing the patrolling. But patrols are still continuing. They've continued throughout the pandemic. And we always partner when we're working in another country. So our goal is not to be needed in the long term, right? Our goal is to build up folks to be independent. So other than my Ecuador team, we don't have an office in Tanzania and Palau although I've had a few folks ask me if we were interested, if we wanted to set up one up there and volunteer to go work there when I do. But we do always support the government agencies or the parks, right? The folks who are responsible for the enforcement, and usually have an NGO partner in there. So, you know, a lot of our NGO partners who are in country, there were, of course, waves back and forth when things weren't safe, but they were also really closely engaging with folks. But throughout it, you know, our big focus at the beginning was making sure that the officers had the tactics or the approaches to operate safely in a pandemic, which was, I learned something new every place that we work, in every situation we work. And yeah, hadn't had to do that before, but we figured it out. And then the other component that we really had to coach folks through was, you know, the pandemic's really impacted people severely from a financial perspective, right? Lots of locations that we work tend to be stunningly beautiful, as our team, as the West of the WildAid team tends to tease us about. You know, they weren't getting income for large months that year. So it was kind of coaching our partners and the rangers through thinking about that, right? Like they knew that they couldn't come down super hard on folks who were just trying to have a livelihood or like feed their family. But on the turn side, they couldn't let their reef get decimated at the same time. So the solution was very unique, you know, and customized for every location, but it was talking them through thinking about that proactively to both meet the community needs and also, you know, again, make sure that there's fish and reef and healthy ecosystems for everyone in the long run. So yeah, but yes, still moving, haven't tried, but my team, in terms of getting on airplanes, we haven't gotten on airplanes very much. But that's okay, because we actually, like, the amount of the world that was accessible was amazing in terms of through these. I mean, we pulled off a Zoom training in Zanzibar, like really effectively. So you know, it's worked out pretty well for us for now. Cool. So thank you for the question. Prati, sorry.
Actually, before Prati jumps in, there was Marissa who put a question on. So it'll be Marissa, Prati, and then Deirdre. We'll go in that order.
It's relatively quick. Hi, I'm Marissa. So for the people that they caught on the boat that you were discussing earlier, is 4 years the maximum sentence there for some situation like that? Or could they have possibly gotten more or had to pay fines or anything like that? Or has it increased since then at all?
So I actually don't know the maximum prison sentence for that law. There's a couple of things that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about deterrence, right? Which is what that is, right? That's the point of prison is, ooh, I don't want to get imprisoned. I'm not going to do this. And to be clear, we did actually see an even greater increased respect for the boundaries of the reserve after this case. So the first is that the vast majority of that crew had no say of what they did, right? They were not indentured, they weren't human slaves by any means. They were all voluntary paid employees, but like the folks who are, and that was a transshipment vessel, so it was receiving fish product from other vessels. Like the folks who are running the crane, like they don't have any say about where they're transiting. So there's a big, so we actually tend to counsel against prison sentences for anyone except for maybe the fish master and the master of the vessel, for that reason. Was 4 years enough? You know, that's, we saw, I think the key again is it's less the punishment and it's more the punishment as a deterrence. And just reiterate that we saw a very clear response from folks. I actually think the seizure of the vessel was the biggest deterrent factor of all that, right? Because that's not just you can't force a foreign company to pay you a fine. There's diplomatic avenues to try and coerce it, etc. But you don't know that you'll ever actually see that money. But no longer having that vessel from which they were receiving a whole lot of income, not just from the loss of the vessel itself. That's, I think, where the deterrence happens, and that's the deterrence where you have power, right? Like, they were fully in their rights to be like, no, you don't get the vessel back. Like, sorry, like, what are they going to do? Like, so I think that's actually the most important. Those kind of things are the more important deterrent. That answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi,
Hey.
thank you for your lecture. So I have two questions. My first is, what happens to all the species caught if you capture a vessel doing illegal activity?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. It really varies from country to country, and it really varies. So a few best practices that we think are best practices are, usually, donation to orphanages if they're fish that can be consumed, or to other in need organizations. There is also the practice of, if it is a inherently legally caught product, right? Like, it's not an endangered species. The other component of it is just selling it and pulling the funds from that into a fund that can be used to support enforcement or other avenues. That is an approach that has to be taken very carefully to make sure that you're following best practices, because then you can get either in a perception or an actual practice where illegal product is being seized to feed the fund that then pays my salary, kind of stuff, right? You can see the problem there. But if you do it right, with enough barriers between the people who are doing the enforcing and the fund, that's another good practice. Sometimes, like, that whale shark wasn't, like, it's returned to the sea or provided for scientific analysis. But, like, sometimes, like, what can you do with it, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And my second question is, does WildAid do any like analysis on the effect of their surveillance, like onto the coral reef, or the scientific kind of analysis of it?
Man, it is so hard to directly link compliance and enforcement to conservation outcomes, because there's so many other things, right? There's also, are the laws that are set up the right laws so that, you're not catching too much fish, even if you're following the laws, or, right, things along those lines. But we do, wherever we work, try to find an emblematic species, like a flag that hopefully someone else, because we're not scientists, right, is monitoring, that can be like an indicator of whether or not what we're doing is working. So for example, in the Galapagos is actually, and in many places where they have this sea cucumber. If anyone, do you know what a sea cucumber is? Okay, for those of you that don't, it's an ugly cucumber looking thing that acts as like basically like the corals and the sands housekeeper. Okay, like they suck in all the sand and poop it out cleaner than it started and leave a much healthier ecosystem. They are very high value and they're really easy to catch, right? They don't exactly move that fast. And they tend to be in shallower water. So if your sea cucumber fishery is viable and you're not seeing sudden crashes in that population, then you probably have pretty good compliance because it's a really high value species. So a lot of motivation for illegal activity, and it's a really easy to catch species, right? So that's one example of like ones that we monitor and we look for. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Miss Deirdre Brannigan.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Megan, nice to meet you. I'll start by saying I'm not a student. I'm just a fangirl of Rachel's amazing seminar series. And when I learned they were open to the public, I was like, I'm in. With that as kind of an introduction, I just wanted to say, when I'm not watching MPA seminars in the evening, I work for an organization called Protected Seas. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and so we've been like mapping, by 2022, we'll have mapped the entire planet for rules, regs, codes of fishing regulations, and other things. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to your organization. We've been working with one of your colleagues, Greg Cassad, to see what we've learned from him is that it can be so challenging to be out on the water, using this smart app and not have like all of the full rules and regs, at disposal. So we've been talking with them about how can we help them get the tools they need so they have them in their back pocket when they're doing some of these enforcement things. And it's just, I think, so interesting. I'm new with this organization, and it was started by some generous philanthropists out of Silicon Valley who were like, why do we not know all the MPA regs on the planet? It's like, well, it's complicated. But in any case, I just wanted to thank you for all the good work that you're doing. And yeah, and we'll continue. I have a meeting with Greg tomorrow, so we'll keep kind of talking about this issue and see how we can help spread the word for some of those enforcement efforts. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and appreciate what you guys have done. It's, yeah, I mean, that was the kind of app when Greg and I were talking about it. I mean, that's the kind of app that we wished we had when we were, moving out of, you're moving out of an area that, the rules from, in your back pocket and, like literally like the New England fisheries for the United States, domestic fisheries, their boarding officer job aid, which is like all of the rules broken down into simpler flow charts, is two binders that thick. So having it in your pocket is a beautiful thing. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. And while I'm thinking of it, the other thing I want to say is Protected Seas is also, and you might know this, working on this like trailer that can be remotely operated for surveillance and dropped by helicopter at any island location. So
yeah, we have one in our Santa Elena National Park location in coastal Ecuador, which is like about 50 miles down the coast from where all those huge oceanic mantas are. And actually probably some of their offshore areas are probably other cleaning stations.
Oh, that's terrific.
And it's working great for them.
Good.
They've caught some. I'm just gathering the case things now, but they've caught cases from. It's super fun. It's super cool, guys. It's like a self-powered trailer using solar. Only Ecuador on the equator apparently is cloudy enough that there are days they have to plug it in. All good. And they got a radar with a video camera or a camera that automatically zooms on the vessels they're looking at, and it gives them alerts when vessels enter into the closed areas at night.
Exactly. I'm glad you guys are using it. What a small world. And I'm sitting in on this conversation this evening. So
Mhm.
thank you again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Casey up there.
Yeah, that was actually a perfect segue into my question. Imagining that, if and when we reach that 30% goal, what do you see enforcement like? I mean, there's just so many complexities, so many collaborations that have to happen. It sounds a little bit overwhelming. And I'm curious, what are your hopes and dreams, I guess, for enforcement?
I think the first is, again, remembering it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough, right? And I think there is a lot of organizations working on the technologies perspective, right? In general, I see there's like two categories. There's like technology, which helps to simplify the problem. And then there's technology that's just like a tool, right? Like that you can use in your day-to-day. And simplifying the problem is something as simple as like the satellites, right? So there's the stupid fisher captains, like the ones in that Galapagos trip that leave their transponder on as they're slowly but surely coming into your closed area legally. So that's the ideal. But there's also the fact that fishermen tend to fish where the fish are, right? And there's actually a lot known about where that fishing activity happens, that you can predict it and use that equipment to eliminate 90% of many ocean areas as being areas of concern for much of the year, because there's no real, there's not a huge amount of fish in those areas, or because of the migrations aren't there, etc. Right? So being able to, so that's one example of a way that you simplify the problem. And then there's a school of thought that's really important where, for example, transparency is something that does that, right? Like the more that we know about the activity, the simpler the problem is. And then the other is really just that global collaboration. The more so 10 years ago, how do I say this without getting super, super geeky and having to teach you about international law? Okay, so 10 years ago, there wasn't even laws about inspecting fish and vessels that came into port, which is the funnel, right? All the fish that gets caught for human consumption has to come into port. Now there's the Port State Measurement Agreement, and all the fish landed by foreign vessels that come into your port have to get inspected. And so progress, future progress. I worked with Thailand in helping them to implement their Port State Measurement Agreement work. Great people, really dedicated. They're a great example of how to do it well. I, as a person who still had folks in the US Coast Guard, in the marine resource enforcement world, who had been doing that job for years, could not get someone on the phone at the Foreign Fisheries Agency, like in the Western Pacific, to validate a load of catch before it got landed. To validate, right? Like, we got to make it, get people together. I can guarantee you, if we could convene a meeting where you just got all the right people in the room, I've seen it happen all the time. You exchange WhatsApp messages, you kind of wink and nod and be like, we can't formally share information because my government doesn't have an agreement with your government, right? And then you're still able to make a huge amount of progress because you have those connections in that peer network. So that's the other area where I think there's a lot of hope, and it just really, you simplify the problem. Like, we know where the most vital habitat is for fish production and for, corals, etc. We can focus it on that, and then on the fish, where the fish are when they're there, and just let the rest of the ocean be beautiful and blue and deep and not worry about it for most of the rest of the year.
Awesome, thank you.
Miguel, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're running out of time here. Thanks, Megan. This has been super interesting. I'm joining you from the Middlebury campus in Vermont. And, I found it super interesting, and thank you for all the work you're doing. Your examples and your work has all been around developed countries, developing countries. You've talked about that. We all know that the developed countries also do a lot of illegal fishing and destruction of habitats and ecosystems. Who's watching over them, or did I miss something there? Is there an assumption that they're doing the right thing? Where do you draw the line? I'm just curious about all that.
Yeah, no. So I'm not battling the EU, because the EU knows damn well what they're supposed to be doing, right? It is not a capacity problem. It is a political will problem. And there are other environmental conservation organizations that are working really hard to work on the political advocacy needed to get the countries that know better to do better. And that is another, like I said, conservation is a team sport. That's another super important component of this, but that's not WildAid's role. So yeah, super important area. I have seen, you know, it's pretty fun to watch Gabon embarrass Italy at the IATTC meetings, with better data about what the Italian vessels are doing or what the Spanish vessels are doing than they're saying that they have, with their supposedly corrupt fisheries observers, you know, like, they're, yeah, it's a really important issue, but just my program needs to be trusted by the government. All right. So our fundamental approach is not to be the battering ram. And there's other folks who do that really, really well. And it's really important, but that's just, if I'm going to get a government to tell me where all their gaps are, embarrassing skeletons in their enforcement system closets are, include me in their highly sensitive fisheries cases, I can't be the person that's also publicly shaming them. So, yeah.
Hey, thanks for that, Megan. There's one question in the chat here from Angela. Maybe we're running a few minutes over. Maybe you could take that one.
Yeah, and Angela said she's in a library, so she can't ask it. But it's up to you, Megan. It's already 7.
No, it's okay. It's just spaghetti and meatballs. It's easy for me.
Okay. Glad you kept it simple. So the question is,
Yeah.
let's see here.
Has there been an incident where the law
Mm.
enforcers refuse cooperation? If so, what to do if that happens?
Yeah, so again, that actually feeds off of Miguel's question. There are more right now governments, enforcement agencies, parks, you know, in some cases, fisheries cooperatives that have the political will and have the interest to do the work than we have the capacity to help right now. We're getting there. Just had to slow down a little bit in COVID. So since my job is not to convince others to do what they need to be doing, my job is to empower people who want to be able to do their job better, to do it better. I just don't work in those locations. That said, we all know that political regimes change, partners change, and there are definitely times when we're in the midst of a project and you might have an unfortunate change in political power. And we've seen that, right? We've been in Ecuador for 20 years. We're not going anywhere from Ecuador. Like, that's our center of excellence, where we use as peer leaders and regional leaders. And you really just, so as I think all of you have noticed, that marine protection system design is has a lot of components to it. And when that happens, you just double down on what the partners you have that are strong can influence. So more focus on the community engagement component of things, for example. We've been working on building a trust fund that will fund operations in Ecuador. That takes a whole lot of legal processes and contracts to get those legal processes in place. We can do that in the background so that when the political sphere changes, you can implement it. And then like the last thing is like, we've had partnerships that just dissolved because of that. And that's just, it happens everywhere. We haven't lost our, we work very hard to be respectful in how we always engage and disengage, and hopefully maybe the door will open up for us again in the future. And if not, hopefully we've learned something from the experience. So yeah.
Yeah, well, those last two questions, I think, really show that you all kind of know your lane. You know what your strengths are, you know where you're at. It's a big world, a lot of organizations, big NGO ecosystem, right? And you know your lane and what you're good at. And I think as someone who works in this space, it's easy to get over the boundaries, right? And get over, and kind of go into places you shouldn't. And so it's good. I think an organization that has that kind of self-confidence and awareness it's a strength. It's a great strength, and one of the things we really like about WildAid. So Meaghan, I'm sure we could keep going here. There's more questions, but we want to respect everyone's time here. So thank you so much, and we look forward as the pandemic eases and you can get a little more out there and really ramp up and scale this up, and we'll have you back for the next iteration. Absolutely. So thanks again, and have a great night, everybody. Be safe and be well.
Good night, folks.